dude, I spend like $1 million plus per month on like my legal team. Like, if you want to fight this in court for the next couple of years, have a blast, but I'll smash you.
But in 2020, $4 million of his money was frozen overnight. Half of it wasn't even his. He owed it to vendors. And the bank made it clear, if you fight this, we will outspend you in court. And this all happened the same week his first child was being born.
There's not actually really very many crises in business. Literally, that's what business is, right? The nature of business is problem solving. You're solving problems for customers, but you're also solving internal problems, operational problems. The better you do, the harder the problems become, and the better you get rewarded for it. I expect I'll probably end up being a billionaire, right? Like that, who knows? But that's what I expect. But I think I will do it without being that compulsive workaholic person who misses birthdays and little league or softball games or whatever it is. I broke up with her because I felt like I didn't have time for a relationship, but there's no, looking back, it doesn't even make sense to me. Like, I don't know why I felt that way, except for that was just the headspace I was in. I was just so overwhelmed and stressed that I felt like I couldn't do anything but the business. So we go up into like the top floor. There's this beautiful conference room with like glass windows everywhere, conference table. So it's me and my attorney on one side of the table, 9 district attorneys for like Marin County, Oakland County, like Napa County, like all the California counties on the other side of the table. And they've got like printouts of all my sales copy and my landing pages and everything.
Welcome to the fifth quarter. Today's guest is Stefan Georgi. He's built multiple 8-figure companies across supplements, marketing, and customer acquisition, including Copy Accelerator and Get Thin MD, which has been bootstrapped and on track to do $50 million in just 3 years. Most founders, they talk about making millions, but very few talk about what it costs, or what happens when you have to decide whether to fight for what's yours or walk away and rebuild from zero. Stefan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I am excited to be here.
Let's start with Holy Land Health. You managed to hit $1 million in your first year in revenue, which on paper and to the outside world is obviously amazing, exceptional work. But you were actually losing money at the same time. What was actually broken in the business for you at the time?
Yeah, so that was my first health supplement company. I had been a freelance kind of copywriter and had done some agency work and things like that previously and went out on my own. And in that first year, I knew how to create good marketing assets, how to write a compelling kind of sales funnel and all of the different pages and things like that. I didn't really know how to run or scale an e-commerce D2C supplement company. And so I came in, built what I thought was a pretty good sort of, sales funnel and everything. But one of the first mistakes is I hired a developer who was almost like it was almost like an abusive relationship, as funny as that sounds. And I kind of laughed about it afterwards because I hired this developer guy who essentially came in and said, hey, the out-of-the-box CRM that you're using is trash. I can build a better one. It'll take me a couple months and maybe like $20,000 or $30,000, and it's going to be so much better. And naively, I said, okay, well, that sounds great. Let's do that. So he started working on that. But as some people who have experience with these sorts of things may be able to guess, especially before vibe coding and kind of where we are today with AI, that turned into like 6 months and I don't know, $100,000. And I still didn't really have a functioning prototype. But the reason I say it was almost like an abusive relationship is because whenever I would talk to that developer, he would tell me how he was killing himself to make it. And not literally like I'm going to kill myself, but just like I'm working 24/7. This is going to be the greatest thing ever. Like, everything would fall apart without me. I'm, the glue that's holding this all together. Essentially you need me. And I'm like, for a while I was like, I guess I need him. Plus, oh, by the way, it's going to get better soon, baby. Like, baby, I'm not going to keep being this way. And so, I listened for a while, but it got to this point where I had like a team I had built, I had payroll. I couldn't really get like traffic. So, like I couldn't send clicks and eyeballs to my funnel because I couldn't really measure anything that was going on. I didn't have accurate data or insights because I didn't have a functioning CRM. And so what I thank God made the decision to do eventually was replace him, but I was afraid to replace him because I'm like, well, what if everything falls apart? What if he's right? So I basically, put out some postings to hire a new dev and went through 2 people before I found a third guy who's great. He's even with Get Thin. So I've been with him for 10 plus years and he's helped me with different things. And essentially I had him go back to the out of the box solutions, build out, redo our whole kind of sales funnel and everything, in secret using out of the box solutions. Started testing it, and wouldn't you believe it, everything just worked. The funnel converted. I could measure stuff. It all just worked. And so then I, fired that developer guy, and that was one of the biggest things. And there's some other issues as well, but that was probably one of the biggest, because I realized even when you do e-com and digital marketing, like you kind of are running a tech company, and that sounds funny to somebody who runs like a real tech company. I get it, but essentially, if your technology doesn't work, then nothing works. So if your tracking doesn't work, if your CRM doesn't work, if your way to measure results and your analytics, if those things don't work and you aren't getting data, then you can't, like, you're powerless. You cannot make good decisions. And so I didn't really understand that, and thank God I was able to correct course before it was too late.
And so really the biggest issue that it sounds like was happening was you were just flying blind and burning cash, trying to not fly blind.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty valid way of saying it.
And I think this happens, I think it's something that is very common for like early entrepreneurs, right? Is they try to build custom solutions way too early instead of using what already works. And so looking back, if you could go back now, what's your rule now around building versus buying an out of the box solution?
I think in general, it's definitely starting with out of the box. I do think AI and again, vibe coding and Claude Code and Chat GPT's Codex and all of these things have changed that a bit. But for the not even average, because that makes it sound like I'm being demeaning, but just for most entrepreneurs, and especially those who are earlier on in their journey, I don't think it makes sense to try and reinvent the wheel. Even if you have I'll use Salesforce as an example. Salesforce is incredibly complex, but let's just say, everyone knows what Salesforce is. Like, if that would work for you and it was cost effective enough based on what you were doing, then trying to go vibe code a Salesforce is probably not actually a good idea, you
Mm.
know? Because there's just stuff that's going to break, and you're going to spend time and resources and treasure on that. And you're going to end up managing like a SaaS building company instead of a customer acquiring company, you
Mhm.
know? So in general, start out of the box, customize more later. I mean, we even with Get Thin, the telemedicine company, like we have talked about building our own sort of platform or our own CRM, but we ultimately use like a third party that provides everything we need. And there's sometimes we're annoyed and things that we wish were different, but compared to trying to rebuild an entire telemedicine platform, it's a lot of time, money, and focus that would go away from both
Mm.
acquiring and keeping and serving patients.
What do you think is a better use of that money for early stage founders?
Probably validating product market fit, like proving that it actually works. Um, acquiring customers and if and running tests, frankly, right? I come from this direct response D2C background, but ultimately I want to kind of do a lean, almost like the lean startup MVP model, Even right now, I just we have a little kind of a numerology funnel that a friend and I vibe coded, where essentially it's like an AI numerologist. We say very clearly it's AI. And the idea is, um, hey, like this AI neurologist will give you your soul urge number and your life path number and all that, and that you can talk with it, and it's cool. But a great example, we set it up. I had a Stripe account for another business. We're just using Stripe for the processing. I can't scale with that. Stripe will freak out probably because it's for another business. But rather than go spend all this time to get my own merchant processing or even switching to another solution, I'm like, let's just validate. None of that matters, right? If it doesn't actually convert and we don't make sales. And similarly, there's all these other things that we can do. Well, we can monetize this way. We could do this. None of that. I'm like, V1 is run ads, see what happens when people go to the ads. How far do they go through in the kind of funnel? Do they buy or not? If they drop off, where do they drop off? Like, let's just validate that people will give us money for this, and then figure out what the economics look like, and then make decisions from there. And I think a lot of people try to go too far down the road, and I'm really about just like that very lean startup
Mm.
testing and validation.
Absolutely. I asked a couple of people how they would describe you prior to this interview, and the common thing that was said was very intentional, thinks through what he does, exceptionally good at marketing with the three things. Now, I think some things are inherent within you. Like I think you can train to be good at something, and some people naturally just have a zone of genius where if they train and have that zone of genius, just propels them into a different stratosphere in terms of what they do. But being intentional and being well thought through, and also operating from first principles, which is what you just described when you were like in the lean startup model, right? So does somebody want my product? Like that's all I'm trying to figure out right now. But I think the intentionality, and the thinking through part can lead to procrastination if not done well, right? Because you think about stuff for way too long. How do you move quickly whilst remaining intentional and well thought through in terms of the business that you want to pursue or product that you want to launch?
I think that's a great question. For somebody like me, I do love possibility, and I love to experiment, and I love to think about for any business I'm in, I can tell you a path to where it becomes a multi-billion dollar kind of business that I can see it really clearly most of the time. And I can keep adding dimensions that would make it more valuable. So, okay, great. But how do we reconcile that with this lean startup MVP type of approach we just talked about? The way I personally do it, and I don't know if this is cultivated or natural or what. I mean, I've thought about it in recent years, so now it's more intentional for sure. Is I will take an idea for a business, I will let myself dream. I will take it to that road of like infinite possibilities and everything that it could become. But then I will work backwards in my mind, almost like it's almost like an expansion and contraction, right? I expand all of it out and then it contracts back to, okay, that's great. But what is the very first step, right? What is the very first step that needs to happen? What's the second step? And then I think about the first few steps, and then I'm very comfortable with like an uncertain future after
Mm,
that, which I don't know if everybody is. So part of the mental model or the mindset component is being very uncomfortable with uncertainty. Like I'm very uncomfortable with uncertainty because it's hard to predict the future anyway. And so if I can do the first couple of steps and I kind of have a cloud of probabilities and options that could, manifest
sure.
were we to focus on it, I'm okay with that because I feel confident in my decision making to that next place where it can branch off. Like I'll make a good decision and generally, also, I made so many good and bad decisions that I know that essentially whatever I decide is going to be fine, and you can always pivot, and you might just branch again quickly. And so, rather than worrying about how it all goes, and it's like I like to see it, and I come back to that very first step.
And are those first few steps that you take, are they the ones that are essentially de-risking the business, just getting an MVP out there as quick as possible?
Yeah, they generally are because like the market is a better arbiter of truth than anybody than your mind is going to be, or AI is going to be, or your friends are going to be, right? Anything. Then it's just at the end of the day, I've been involved with so many kind of launches of new products and brands and offers, and what you see over time is not everything is just overnight massive success. In fact, most aren't.
Mhm.
But one, sometimes they are, and when you see that, you realize that that's possible. Like you launch something, and it just you go from $0 to $100,000 a day in ad spend, like profitably in like a week, and you're like, this is crazy, right? It happens. Um, but also even when that doesn't happen, you see signals. And when you see no signals, I've learned through experience, I suppose, to generally cut pretty fast. Like I
Mhm.
think there's endless opportunities. So rather than try to chase something where there's really no positive signals or feedback from the market, I'd rather know that and then pivot to something where I do get those signals.
How do you know when the right time is to do that?
I mean, it's really hard if you really it probably comes down to your level of belief in an idea. That's one important factor. I think if you really believe in an idea and you launch that idea and you get very limited or no positive signals, I can understand fighting for it. I think
Mm,
you look at, is it the presentation of the idea? And by idea, again, idea could be a brand, a product, the messaging, whatever it is. Um, because if you're just sort of presenting it in a really terrible way, then fine. If you want to try and test the mode of presentation a bit. So the type of sales funnel or the messaging or what the offer is or whatever, like, okay, cool. Um, is there data integrity is actually really important, going back to what we just said.
mm,
'Cause I think a lot of times people will launch things and not have good analytics or data. And so like are you actually getting no signals or are you missing the signal? Right? Like that's really important.
mm,
But if you are really confident that the signal is, you're measuring correctly and there's no signal. You try a few pivots, uh, and also like, what's your financial tolerance like for for pain? Because
Mm,
I kind of believe in like almost like this roulette model when it comes to selling direct to consumer products, and that can be and our services, and it can be physical products, it could be informational products like a book or a course, it could be whatever. But the roulette model is essentially if I sit down at a roulette table with infinite money and I just keep betting on black every time, and every time I lose, I just double my money, like I will ultimately win, right? Like eventually, if I walk away, if I, eventually it will roll to black. Like like it's not going to be red. It could be read 1,000 times, but if I've doubled my money every time, then on the 1,000th and one time it's black, I win, I walk away. Right. The problem is having enough money to do that and not walk away. And so I think it's kind of the same thing with D2C. It's like if I have infinite money, I can probably make almost any product work unless it's just an absolutely terrible idea. But there's still an opportunity cost there. Like,
mhm.
do you want to keep risking more and more money, and do you want to keep sitting there, and is it worth it versus just finding something where, you hit black on your second or third roll, versus in your 500th or 1,000th roll.
And so with Holy Land Health, you are bleeding cash, and but at some point things start to click, you know. And I remember a conversation with you where we were discussing the levers that you were pulling on to get out of the situation that you were in. And so, what actually changed when things started to click? What were the things that were happening inside of the business, the decisions that you were making where you're like, okay, these levers that I'm pulling on now are really starting to move the needle?
Yeah. So a few things. Obviously getting the tech to just work and being able to actually measure and get data was extremely valuable. The next thing was how do you look at and kind of analyze that data? So I had built a team, and it's still one of the cool experiences of my life because it was the first time building like a real team and a real company. And I had all these sort of interesting beliefs about opportunities for people who were smart, but maybe wouldn't get like the traditional career path of like finance or investment banking or whatever. Maybe they were a college dropout or they went to some no name school because I sort of had a very untraditional path myself. And so um, I hired a team of smart young people, uh, but I started empowering them. Each person owned like a different, area and a set of KPIs. So whether that was new customer acquisition or retention or customer service, we had built an in-house sort of customer service team. Even stuff around like load times and sort of the tech side of the website. And so I basically had them owning those categories, reporting in a team wide meeting. Like every week, we would come together, review the KPIs last week, this week, what's on the horizon. I run all of my companies with like through Slack, and I did this was the first company, but I am very intentional to essentially keep all of the pretty much everybody is in every channel unless it's got extremely sensitive financial information because I like people having really wide visibility. I hate silos. I like despise silos. Um, I think it's just so stupid. Like, the person in customer service should know what's going on with like the attempt to acquire customers, right? Like the guy who's trying to acquire customers or the woman who's in charge of acquiring customers should know what's going on with tech because if there's some tech issue, like it seems so obvious to me, but I've seen a lot of companies that have these weird siloed things and I can't stand it. And so I built that a lot of openness, and then I really invested in becoming a leader, which sounds so silly, right? But I got like the 21 irrefutable laws of leadership. I read the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and then Principle Centered Leadership, which are both by Stephen Covey, some John C. Maxwell stuff. And I actually implemented it. And this was really important because I had a couple of those kind of leader level team members who were struggling. And at a certain point, I realized like I need to just give them ownership and tell them to sink or swim, but also give them the tools and empower them and give them the opportunity. Essentially, I have to let go, which is also really hard for people, I think, to do. And sure enough, like this surprised me. And just a quick sort of side story of that is the breaking point there. I hadn't walked away from the business at all. I was working, nonstop, and I was like depressed because it wasn't working, and I'm like drinking more than I should. I lived in Vegas, and uh, like just sort of struggling a bit. And I went to go to Coachella. This would have been like 2015, and it was my first time like leaving the business for 3 or 4 days. And I'm at Coachella, and I get a message from our accounting woman that Blake and Malai, two of our other team members, are in the hallway of the Regis office where we had a couple like, offices in a Regis building that we rented monthly. and they're in the hallway screaming at each other about something. And I left Coachella, flew back to Las Vegas, but essentially I was like, we got to stop this. I can't be that I cannot leave this business for even 2 days without everything falling apart and you guys screaming at each other. And so I sat them down. We talked about their roles. Essentially, what is the scope? This is your lane. This is your lane. You need to be empowered, or you're gonna have to find a new place to work. And then I left again and went to my first mastermind ever. And then the honestly, one of the best things I did, Bilal, is I stopped responding on Slack. Essentially, I'd see them bring up an idea, and I'd see the team because I had this open kind of setup. Like I'd see them debate the like an idea, and I'd want to chime in and be like, do it this way, right? But I didn't. I just stopped. And the craziest thing happened, which is that 80% of the time they came to the same conclusion that I would have steered them towards. 10% of the time they came to a different conclusion, but I would think about it and go, that's actually a fine way to do it as well. So like I don't really need to get involved. And then 10% of the time their ideas were absolutely horrible and I would step in. But like that's very empowering, right? Suddenly I don't have to chime in and be the and then because I'm not doing that, they stopped waiting for my permission to take action. Right. So suddenly they're more empowered, they're more confident. And then the last part of this all is that at that mastermind, for me at the time, like I had been afraid of affiliate traffic. Most people probably know about affiliates. Essentially, they just promote your product or offer or brand or service. And when they make sales, they get a commission. But I talked to a guy at this mastermind. I'd never been to a mastermind before. And he's like, oh, I've got a great sort of affiliate partner. You should talk with him. I was pretty desperate. I said, okay. And then I ended up doing many, many, many millions of dollars with that affiliate partner. And it was really just from like one relationship that in referral that happened at that mastermind. And that was a huge part of it also.
I want to go back to setting KPIs, giving people autonomy, being more hands off with the baby that you've taken care of, right? That means the most to you. I think that's something that people really struggle with. I think as a founder, everybody finds it difficult to let go to some degree, right? And so what's your framework for leaving the business to other people, to your employees, right? And keeping them accountable at a high standard without micromanaging. So one of the ways you just said just now about Slack is one of them, where you would just leave it alone, right? What are some of the other ways that you would have oversight without micromanaging?
Yeah, in a perfect world, I'm not an operator, right? I mean, I operate businesses and I can play one on TV, but ultimately I'm more of like a visionary than I am like a hardcore operator. So, having like an operator, integrator, COO type of person, if you have that luxury, is really helpful. Because I mean, the short answer is that you have to have a good team in place. The KPIs are established. They are reporting. It's it's filtering up to you, and then you are on a call, whether it's at least once a week, once a month, whatever it is, with leadership, going through those KPIs. Like you're still getting
Hmm.
that information. And then on Slack, I still read every forget then kind of same thing has happened. I'm very removed now from the day to day, but I read like almost every message on Slack. But also I've got Angela, my amazing business partner, who's now running Get Thin, and whenever's needed, I will hop on a call with her, message whatever. But I kind of proxy through her. The thing is, you do have to. There is a timing issue, right? There's like the E Myth is a great book. You probably read it. But there's sort of that delegation versus abdication principle or idea. And essentially what most people do, they start building a business, they hire some kind of operator, they go, this is great. And then they just like abdicate. They're like, I'm gonna go play golf and do whatever, right? And things
Yeah.
fall apart.
Yeah.
So the challenge is like you're delegating, you're still checking in, you're still holding people accountable. You hopefully have maybe somebody on your team, whether you could even be like an executive assistant, it could be an operations person, whatever, who is like helping to measure the KPIs. Obviously, if you have like a dashboard, people are reporting, they're self-reporting daily in Slack for us, and we have like weekly calls reviewing them. But instead of me being on the weekly calls now, Angela is, and then
Mhm.
I'm like on more sporadically. But I've done this multiple times now. I have a call center that I sold a couple years ago, which spun out of Planet Health. Like that got to a point where it did like 10 million plus a year as a call center, and it was very profitable. And I got to the point where I was on like one call a month basically with the CEO and the COO, and I was just sort of like chairman of the board, and it was phenomenal. I'd always joke this is the best business ever. And it wasn't, by the way, because they also lacked the vision and drive to grow the business more than $10 million, and it drove me crazy.
Mhm.
But I also wasn't that passionate about call centers. So the like I can come in here and really bust my ass and fire people and roll heads to try and get this call center to grow. Or I can be like, okay, whatever. This thing puts a couple $1 million a year net profit in my bank account, and I have to get on one call a month for it, and I'm building other businesses that I'm more passionate about. I'm going to accept that. So I don't know if that fully helps or not, or if if it was too broad of an answer, but essentially, I think it really comes down to the team and the KPIs, and then I think you still have that key person, like a key man or key woman,
Mm.
who is kind of like your chief of staff or the COO.
Yeah. So essentially, having the right data so that you know what's being done is what I gather from your answer, and then have somebody who is driving that and who likes it more than you do.
For me, that works. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then you mentioned masterminds and affiliates as a pretty big unlock, and it sounded like the affiliates came, the affiliate idea of a relationship came from the mastermind. And so, are those the three main areas where you think which really unlocked the business? That's when you started to realize, okay, like, okay, we figured this out. Now I can see the kind of light at the end of the tunnel. We're starting to scale. Everything's clicking.
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge part of it. And again, it was a timing thing because if I got in the affiliates before the tech was unlocked or before the team was dialed in, then I would have squandered it, And so it kind of all worked out
Yeah,
ultimately for in the right kind of order. But
yeah.
that was the big unlock for sure.
How important is in-person events and masterminds?
I think they're really valuable. I mean, to be completely honest, I don't go to as many as I used to. Because it changed my life. They were incredible. So I joined a bunch of masterminds. I was spending 150, $200,000 a year on mastermind memberships. I would travel a lot and for several years and go to every event. As I started having kids, I've slowed down on that, and now I haven't really gone to, unless it's like really close to me. I don't really go and to anything. But as I've moved out of sort of the day to day of Get Thin, in my head I'm like I should probably start going to some things again, right? So why? Because it exposes building new relationships is always valuable. Seeing what works is always valuable. It exposes you to like what is working right now. You'll see you'll get ideas from people, best practices you can take in your businesses. And so I think they're good for like exposure to people and ideas. And so I think there's like a time for them. But also if you're really set and building and scaling and things are going pretty well, and there's also a time probably to like not go to them. Like I know people who are just like professional event attenders. And I'm like, where do you like when do you actually work on your business? So I do think there's two sides to it.
Hmm.
Uh but yeah, it was life changing. The other thing too with masterminds early on was just like not feeling like I was on an island, because when you're doing it yourself and you don't have a community that you're plugged into, you feel like all these things are on you and you alone and the burden, the weight of the road, and you've got people who depend on you. And then you go to like a good mastermind or high level kind of room through an event and you realize that there's 50 or 100 or 200 other people who are all going through that exact same thing or have all been through it and come out the other side. And that part is, I think, very valuable because it makes you realize, you know, that there is another side you can come out, and also you start building relationships and people you can talk to when you're struggling and things like that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so, you figured it out, things are scaling, and I think probably most people listening will think this is where the story gets easier, right? Stefan just goes and explodes and multiplies and compounds everything that he's built. But for you, actually, this is where it breaks, right? And I
Couple
wanted to,
ways.
and so I kind of want to go into the CBD situation because this is very different. So why don't you just give some light context on the CBD situation and the CBD company?
I will, but let me actually give you a second part of how it breaks that I didn't share with you before, but it's I think valuable. Okay, so they're intertwined sort of. So through the masterminds, I'm building all these relationships, and one guy, I won't name him on this podcast. Great person, still a good friend. He was the original COO for a really, really, really well known D2C brand that pretty much anybody listening to this would know. And then but it was early on with that brand. The brand's like a multi-billion-dollar brand now. And he kind of was scratching for more direct response, like, kind of put up stuff, test it quick, make sales type of like environment and ventures, whatever. And I'm like, I'm here with Point Health, going great. So like, hey, let's partner on some additional sort of brands and things in the supplement space. And one of the ones we picked was on the CBD front. So that starts going, but meanwhile, with Point Health, I get a please explain letter from 9 district attorneys in California. called like the Gang of Nine. And essentially it goes, hey, we noticed your website and your landing pages, and you're basically making all these claims that uh, don't seem like they're scientifically validated. So can you please provide like studies and things? So more context on that. My first time doing supplements, I was like referencing in all my copy like scientific studies. Okay, like so cinnamon helps with like lowering blood sugar. Like there was a bunch of studies to say taking cinnamon can help with type 2 diabetes and lower blood sugar. Turns out you still can't say that about cinnamon because it's like a drug claim, right? I had no idea. Like truly, I went through such pains to find citations, and I'm like, this is incredible. Wow, like why don't people talk about supplements this way all the time? You know what I mean? And then turns out there's a very good reason. Um, so I got like a referral to like a lawyer. Lawyers like basically these guys are it's kind of a shakedown. Like they don't want you to send the citations. They want to extract money for taxpayers. That was his view. Um, and so he's like, we should meet them. So, and this, by the way, my baby's just being born. My wife's like, super pregnant, about to have my first kid. So the CBD thing we'll get to in a minute. You already teased it. But first I go fly to Northern California to a federal building or not federal, but a conference building in Oakland, California. And I meet my attorney. My attorney goes, hey, you know what? Normally it's just one or two of these attorneys. It's, I'll do the talking. They'll want some kind of like you to refund California customers, we'll be good. I'm like, all right, cool. So we go up into like the top floor. There's this beautiful conference room with like glass windows everywhere, conference table, and there's all 9 district attorneys on one side of the table. And I'm like, in my, I guess what, early 30s, like 31, 30, yeah, probably 31. So it's me and my attorney on one side of the table, 9 district attorneys for like Marin County, Oakland County, like Napa County, like all the California counties on the other side of the table. And they've got like printouts of all my sales copy and my landing pages and everything. And it was a really intense experience. But ultimately, we talked through it. I kind of explained very truthfully. Essentially, I didn't know I couldn't do that, which was true. I remember at one point I had a bag of supplements in my little travel bag with my laptop, and because I somehow I really like supplements. I use them. They're like, really, I pulled out this Ziploc bag full of supplements, and they're like, what is this? I'm like, well, that's vitamin D, that's L-lysine, that's L-cysteine, blah blah blah. They were cracking up, and they were like, oh yeah, well, just give us like $1 million and we'll be good, And my attorney's like, go downstairs. So I go downstairs, and essentially the deal ended up being, offering refunds to California customers, and I think the maximum was like $250,000. And then if they didn't take their refund, or there was a difference, then I had to give them the rest of the money to like they would donate to charity. And there was no like judgment or anything like that. But we accepted that. We had to email the California customers, anybody who the email bounced, we had to send them like a postmarked letter,
Wow.
call them. The crazy thing though is like I think total we had like $7,000 in refund requests because like we built an actual brand too. Like people really liked the products. We would email them every single day with value emails, all this stuff. So it made me kind of annoyed because it's not like there was some huge surge of people who felt like they had been
Scammed or something. Yeah.
scammed. Yeah, but and then ultimately I had to write a check and send it in, and that was that. And they had said I had told them when we were in the conference room, hey, I'm just gonna stop doing this after this meeting. And they seemed like really surprised. Like, you don't have to stop doing it. You just have to change what you're saying. But in my head, I'm like, no. Like, this is like this freaked me out. So I did. But I had this other guy, we're doing other stuff. So we started doing CBD. And I'm like, this is awesome. CBD is just the hemp bill or whatever it's called. The farm bill has just passed. Nobody's really doing it yet. We had a product called a Green Relief, and it was like these. It was, by the way, it was really good quality CBD. I had a friend who was a supplement manufacturer who I'd met through Holy Land Health, and great product. And it just took off. I mean, we were doing like $200,000 a day, $300,000 a day
Wow.
in sales, like just crushing it. Like this is like so awesome. And then at the time I was in New York with my wife because that's where she's from. She's like literally about to burst. And to get like an email from the business partner, like, hey, or a message on email, like, we have to talk. And essentially the bank we were working with, it was like a merchant processing, kind of company that provided like merchant processing. They froze all of the accounts. The owner, Mike, is freaking out. He said that he just met with like all of like his banking partners, and they're like, you're selling marijuana and illegal drugs, and so he paused everything. He's freaking out. And it was like, at first we thought, okay, well, no problem. This is kind of a misunderstanding. There's no THC in this. It's CBD. It's like legal now through the hemp bill, whatever it is. And at the beginning, the guy Mike was talking about, yeah, you're gonna get your money. I gotta settle all this. I gotta review it. I gotta do this. But as a couple of days turned into a week, and then 2 weeks, and then 4 weeks, and then the responses started getting more terse or more intermittent, we started kind of freaking out, and so we started kind of trying to put some legal pressure because we had, like you mentioned, like over $4 million. So half of that was profit, half of that was owed to vendors, and we couldn't sell anything. By the way, we also had some other brands that we'd spun up with the same merchant processing, so he froze everything. Well,
Wow.
actually, no, sorry, he didn't freeze everything, but we're not going to run anything
More
else
with you.
through this
Yeah,
guy.
yeah.
Like, yeah, well, yeah. So, yeah, and then essentially we tried to put legal pressure, and the guy's response was basically, dude, I spend like $1 million plus per month on like my legal team. Like, if you want to fight this in court for the next couple of years, like have a blast, but like I'll smash you. And so ego wise, you're like, F you, like all mad. Yeah, so it's a really hard decision because on one hand, you're like, okay, I'm about to have a baby, having, an extra $1 million because half of the 2 million that was profit would be good. Plus, we owe all these vendors. So I can either, tell all these vendors, like, whoopsie, sorry, and they might try to sue us or come after us with collections or whatever it's gonna be. So we can fight this guy, or all right, Hoyland Health was successful until I ran to the DA thing. The CBD thing was really successful until this happened, which sucks. A few of the other things we were testing and running, like we're doing okay. And so basically it was like, if I use what's going to be more profitable at the end of the day, right? How am I going to make more money? Is it going to be spending the next 1 or 2 years of my life trying to fight this guy over this money, and like all the legal costs I'll incur, all the mental headspace it's going to take, like everything? Or is it to just walk away from that money? Feels like you're completely wronged, but walk away from it and, just make more money. And so ultimately decided we're just gonna make more money. And so my partner and I, in those businesses, we ended up spinning up, some other sort of brands that were selling supplements. We didn't do it with that guy, obviously. We got them working. They weren't at the same kind of scale as CBD had been, maybe doing like 30 to 40, $50,000 a day in sales, but not always high margin. And essentially over whatever it was, I don't know, like 4, 5, 6 months, maybe longer even. Every single dollar profit that came from the companies, we just used it to pay back
Wow.
the vendors we owed. And we talked to the vendors and said, hey, we're gonna have to, here's what happened essentially, and we will pay you back, but we just have to do it over time. And we did. We just ran the companies until they we paid back the vendors, and a bit longer after that, and then ended up parting ways with that partner. Although, like I said, we're still good friends today, and we've actually done a bunch of other business things together. He was one of our big call center clients. He has just all kinds of cool stuff since then. So it kind of
Yeah.
worked out, but it was definitely a challenging time, especially as about to just have my first child.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I think also when you have relationships on the line where you owe people money too, right? Like when you owe vendors money, it's not just lost profit. It's like, oh, especially because you're a good human and you paid everyone back. And I'm sure your intention was like, I have to make sure these guys are taken care of and they're made whole. But I can't imagine what that must feel like in real time, right? Wife's about to give birth any moment. And then now you owe people money, and the money that you thought was coming in for you and your family isn't there anymore. How easy was it to separate like those personal angst and feelings with the business decision of, okay, I just got to go do this again?
It was hard, but I got over it pretty fast, I would say. I don't know if that's just a superpower of mine, or if it's born from experience, but when something really bothers me, I guess when I get a business, like I might take a day or 2 or 3 to sort of process or even mope a little bit, but that's it. Then it's like, okay, it is what it is. The only thing to do is move forward. And I do think that that first experience with Holy Land Health like really helped me with that. Not just the DA thing at the end, but the whole first year of struggling, and you know, and even then, by the way, not at nearly that scale, but I owed vendors money during the first year for that too, where like I would just like a supplement provider, the manufacturer, or I would buy email drops from somebody and they wouldn't do well because I didn't, the funnel was broken, but then I still had the money for it and I'd have to negotiate. I haven't, thank God, been in that position in several years of having to like negotiate terms because I can't pay somebody. Like hope not knocking on wood a million times while I say this, I really dislike that feeling, and hope I never have to have it again. But basically you realize like, okay, all of this is just solvable, right? Everything's solvable. If you tell somebody, hey, F you, I'm never gonna give you your money back, then it's probably not solvable. You're gonna probably be in court, right? But generally, if you've built those relationships with people, and the relationships are a really important, huge part of business, right? And you build the relationships, you have a track record, and you come to them and say, hey, look, here's what's happening, and I need help. Like, I just need, I have the best intentions. I need time. Most people will give it to you, and even those people from the first supplement company or from the CBD thing, all those vendors, I ended up doing millions and millions and millions of dollars of business with them, in the years that future years, including them extending big lines of credit to me and stuff because they knew, okay, well, this guy's definitely gonna pay us back if things ever hit the fan. So
Yeah.
without getting off on a tangent, yeah, like it was a couple of days, and I don't know why. I just, what other option did I have? You know what I mean? The only option was to keep moving forward. You know?
Yeah, easier said than done, right? I think you're very pragmatic about the way your outlook is on things, right? I think for some people it can be quite overwhelming where it's like, well, I'm just so underwater, how will I continue?
One thing below, sorry, just because I did contrast it in my head at the time. I remember thinking about that and being like, I could essentially let this sort of thing define me. I could go around being the person who goes, "Oh, I had these millions of dollars, but we got screwed," and essentially that could be my whole identity. And I thought about it really intentionally, and but that made me so like shiver and like ickness, like that's so gross seeming. And so that might just be my constitution. I don't know, but that
Yeah.
was really when I compared and contrasted it mentally. I'm like that made the alternative path of just moving forward seem a lot more appealing.
How do you think you changed after each of these like significant milestones of hard moments? I know there's another period of life which is pretty taxing and challenging for you as well, but after getting to 1 million in revenue year one, but you're losing money, you're in this abusive relationship that you've described with this developer, right? You finally get rid of him, but things start to work. But in that period, pre things starting to work and the hardships, you look back and you look back at the CBD company, you look back at those attorneys. Who did you change into on those three different timelines?
I think it's just like a more resilient person for sure. I think somebody with a good perspective. And then I remember I was sharing this with you recently too. Like the big realization from Hoyland Health that I've carried on through everything, and now it's really just ingrained in who I am, is that there's not actually really very many crises in business. Like literally that's what business is, right? The nature of business is problem solving. You're solving problems for customers, but you're also solving internal problems, operational problems, everything. That's literally what business is like you solve problems. The harder, the better you do, the harder the problems become, and the better you get rewarded for it. And so just shifting that around, I'm somebody who I really don't get phased by anything. Like even get thin, you go negative for a couple months. GLP-1s, like we're negative 2 to 4 months depending on things with every new patient. So we've had cash flow challenges in that business, not like so severe that we're like, oh my god, we've never thought like we might not be able to make payroll or we have to shut the business down. But there's pressures there, but it's not even like it just does not even phase me. It's just like, yep, that's what happens in business, So I don't know. I think it's just an
Mm.
accepting of that and very, very thick skin, I suppose.
Yeah, it's interesting because you don't talk about any of these things like it is a crisis. You do speak about it as if it is just a data point. It's almost like we're looking at a KPI sheet together. You're like, and that's a very interesting, unique mindset. And I think from a lot of the more elite founders and successful people I know, that's a common theme, but it's very uncommon for the masses, you know? And you said there are no real crisis in business, which I'm sure will flag a lot of people's attention when they hear that, right? Because for most of it, it all seems like a crisis, right? Especially when you're trying to find product market fit and then scale, and then the goalposts keep changing, and you have turnover, and um, it almost seems like a constant crisis in business. Some may argue, but you say the opposite. And so, when did that belief click for you, where it was like, well, that isn't the case, even though most view it this way? It's the opposite for me.
I wrote this like list with during Hoyland Health, and it was something like 23 business truisms I think about in the shower, and it was literally like that. I was just like in the shower one day, and they kind of like had all the shower thoughts where it just clicked for some reason. Why in the shower? I don't know, but essentially it was just the whole realizing. Basically, I guess for my first company, early on, everything did feel like a crisis. So I thought I was in crisis mode a lot, and my adrenals are drained and the cortisol is flowing, and but then like a year goes by or whatever, and you're like, okay, I'm still here. Like that crisis got resolved, that crisis got resolved, that crisis got resolved. And then you start thinking like, were they really a crisis or like, is this just
Mm.
part of being a business? And you can still go like, hey, how do I set it up so I have better quality problems, right? But they're problems, they're not a crisis. And so I don't know why it snapped. It just clicked while taking a shower.
For someone listening that struggles with it, how do you encourage them to get better at it?
That like the reframing, would you say?
I
Like
think the reframing, yeah. How would how with you, it's clear that you have a very strong mindset, right? And a lot can be thrown at you, and you'll probably just still keep charging forward and continuing to make money out of the crisis, right? For founders that are listening that struggle with it, and I know very successful ones that do as well. By the way, it's not just new entrepreneurs that struggle with this. I'm not even I sometimes struggle with this. Some overwhelm, some imposter syndrome, some anxiety, right? When things aren't panning out the way that you want them to. So if someone says, "Hey, Stefan, how do I become better at this?" What would your answer be?
there's a couple of things perhaps. One, and I got this originally from I think I heard Tim Ferriss talk about it originally, but it's almost like play out the worst case possible scenario for it. So, okay, if this is true, if I fail, what really happens, right? And because it's like you in your head, failure is this really abstract but very scary fear. And if you play it out, it's not as bad. It's like, okay, am I still gonna have a house? Like, probably. Like, no. Okay, am I gonna be homeless? Well, no. My parents would take me in. Whatever.
Mm,
I'd lose all my money. Okay, would I not be able to make more money ever? Well, yeah, I could probably make more money. I have some relationships. I could do things like if you just sort of play it out to that. More go actually go concrete with like it's probably the worst reality for you. The worst reality of any legit like kind of degree of probability is probably not really nearly as bad as you think it is. It would be frustrating, maybe humiliating, maybe you'd be ashamed. Like I understand that, but you would be alive. Your needs would be met on the hierarchy of needs. Your family would be okay. In the vast majority of cases, nothing catastrophic would actually happen. So I think that's one way to look at it. And then the other is just to build up the thick skin. I mean, I think you just reframe it and realize there's a reason like all these billionaires and successful entrepreneurs all love talking about their failures and, almost like fetishize them. It's because that's where you actually learn. That's how you get better. Like, right? Like, fail up, right? Like fail fast. Like it's not just like random cliche BS. It's like, that's literally how you get to the winner. Like you fail to win. Right. And so if you don't think that every single really successful person like Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg or endless, entrepreneurs for the last 100+ years who've all said that their failures are what made them into who they are and their success. If you don't think they're all just, randomly mass hallucinating together, and maybe there's a little kernel of wisdom there, then perhaps you could take some comfort from that and realize that if failing worked for them, it'll probably work for you too.
yeah, yeah. No, I think that's so key. And so, Stefan, you're obviously very successful. You built this mental operating system around pressure and decisions that allow you to be more successful. You've made the money, right? You've had multiple companies. But there's always the other side to this, right? And it's what is the cost to have got there? And it's not always necessarily just a monetary one or a stress induced one, right? You did mention early on about how stressful things were, how anxious you were, particularly around these lawyers. You briefly mentioned substance abuse, right? And you also mentioned breaking up with your current wife, your now wife, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, how much of that do you think was actually coming from looking back at it now, right? How much of that do you think was coming from the business versus just Stefan, the individual?
I mean, I think a lot was the business. With my now wife, and we've been together since 2011 with some breaks in between, including that breakup in 20, I guess it would have been late 2015, early 2016. I remember just being so stressed about the business, and she was in New York, doing grad school. She had decided to go to grad school. I was in Las Vegas, but like even to this day, she's like very low maintenance. One of the things I love about her, she's like not super high maintenance. She's not super like needy or clingy or whatever, and she never has been. We have an incredible relationship, but for me that works. It's not like you know like I appreciate that about her, and she wasn't like super needy then, but I just felt like I don't have time for this relationship. I'm sitting here just struggling every day trying to make this work. I'm overwhelmed, like all the feelings, and I mean honestly, I just like I broke up with her because I felt like I didn't have time for a relationship, but there's no looking back, it doesn't even make sense to me. Like, I don't know why I felt that way, except for that was just the headspace I was in. I was just so overwhelmed and stressed that I felt like I couldn't do anything but the business. And I don't know why.
Do you feel like in early stage entrepreneurship and being a first time founder or a repeat founder requires this kind of sacrifice? It's almost a prerequisite in order to succeed because you're just spending so much time building the company.
I have mixed feelings on this. I think that as a first time founder, it'll almost certainly require more of your time and attention than as a third, fourth, fifth, 10th time founder. So my belief today in general is that my entire goal is that I'm going to be continue to be extremely successful and have even bigger successes ahead of me without sacrificing quality time with my family. Right. So I kind of reject this idea that I expect I'll probably end up being a billionaire. Right. Like that. Who knows? But that's what I expect. But I think I will do it without being that compulsive workaholic person who misses birthdays and little league or softball games or whatever it is. And I think that, there's trade-offs and challenges, involved in doing that. But to me, that goes back to the whole philosophy around business. It's just another challenge to be solved. So like I categorically believe that. I have a pretty good track record to back up what I'm saying, including like right now. And, but I have the luxury of already having had a good amount of success, right? So I don't think you need to like throw away everything else in your life as a first time founder to succeed. I do think that you will probably work more hours and be more stressed and have more strain on your relationships. I think that is a natural thing that happens. Ideally, if you know what's happening and you communicate with your significant other or your family and it's really worth it to you for an idea you believe in, I think that that's fine and more power to you. But like again, if I go back to my wife, my girlfriend at the time, like there was actually no she was in New York. We weren't even like it's like I even had to take her out to dinner. You know what I mean? It
Yeah.
was sort of just in my head. So yeah, and then by the way, I think that's where I love working with young entrepreneurs. I have a 23-year-old literally across the room from me in my office right now, Cole, and I have two other 23-year-olds. I hired them to help me build this like agentic marketing solution, and we're doing all this awesome stuff. And I love having young entrepreneurs around me, and just especially now with AI and everything, and they're so smart and brilliant. Um, but when you're 23, like that's a good time to start taking those risks because you don't necessarily have a family and you don't have all those things. So you know, starting young probably makes a lot of sense, so you can get those lessons in before you do have a wife and kids or husband and kids.
Why do you think most founders get this wrong?
I do think there's like just stereotypes around it and there's myths. I do think they also often will emulate someone like an Elon Musk or uh, you know, other billionaire who it's like the stories of how they just sort of that's what they did. Um, I think it's hard for most founders to like sort of reconcile with the fact that they're not Elon Musk, and then it's even harder for them to reconcile with the fact that maybe they don't want to be Elon Musk. Um, I also think it's a skill issue, to be completely honest with you. I think when you're a first time founder, you probably lack a lot of skills that come with experience. So the building of teams, the knowledge of how to set up, a
Yeah.
business that acquires customers, understand that the economic levers that move the business that create more margin, that then enable you to hire more people. To be completely honest with you, it's probably a skill issue more than anything else.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that it's hard to shortcut that, right? So I get it. You probably can, but it takes you being like a really blank canvas and sort of opening your brain and finding really good mentors and just being willing to challenge a lot of your assumptions. Where it's a lot easier to feel like, hey, if I work 24/7, I'm in control, right? You feel like if I'm working constantly, then I feel like I'm doing everything, and I feel like I have an illusion at least of control that I'm controlling the outcome with my time because I'm literally connected to this business. If I remove myself to go spend some time with my wife and kids, I'm disconnected from this business and I'm the person driving it forward. So if I'm not there, then the business fails. If the business fails, then I fail my wife and kids. And there's so much mental gymnastics that happens, and understandably so. But probably more than anything, it's a skill issue, and just you haven't acquired the right skills yet.
Were you ever the kind of person who used business as an excuse to avoid parts of your life that you didn't want to deal with?
It's a good question. I don't. I mean, I don't really think so. Within reason, I'll be like so. Even like my own financial stuff. Like I've got my tax people emailing me, and like our QuickBooks, like one of our QuickBooks accounts went down, and like I need to reinstate it. And I'm like, I'm building the future of agentic AI marketing. I don't have time to do this. So I usually do it. I guess so, but it's less of like deep personal relationships and more like with, uh,
Admin.
just admin shit I don't want to do. Yeah.
Now obviously that you've made many millions, you've lost many millions, you've walked away from many millions. You've redesigned your own life in terms of your personal side, your family, your also success. You've rebuilt multiple times. GetThinMD is on track to do north of $50 million already in year three, and I'm sure that that future looks even brighter as time goes on. What does winning look like to you now, having gone through all of that?
I think there's a balance to it. So I don't think I personally would feel like I am winning unless I had a great home life. So family is truly really important to me. So my wife, my two daughters, maybe we'll have a third, who knows. But nothing, none anything I do would be worth it if I had a disconnected home life. So that's number one. Um, financially or in terms of businesses, the motivation is really solving interesting and unique problems. Like like on a pure vanity level, like I've sold two companies now. I think there's a chance that get then one up selling and perhaps in like the 8-figure range. It's who knows. It depends what happens. Could be a 9-figure exit, but there's also it's uncertain. But I mean, I would really like to sell a company for 9 or 10 figures. I think just as like a milestone thing, it would just be interesting to do. Um, but it also just has to be something unique. So now we talked about all these supplement companies, right? I could go start another supplement company right now, and I feel very confident I could scale it to like 20 or 30 million very easily, probably get it to like 100 million plus, but I have no desire to do it because I've already done it multiple times, right? So it has to be something like really interesting, like trying to like agentically solve full stack D2C marketing and then doing it like on an enterprise level subscription model. Um, and then I've got some other ideas I won't share right now on the podcast, but like that could be anywhere from an easy 9-figure exit to a multi-billion dollar type of thing, like within, and by the way, in the shortest timeline possible because of AI, things are happening so fast. Like that's really exciting. Like I wake up every day excited about that, working with my team on that. But it has to be something I'm really excited about. So yeah, there just has to be like meaning and excitement, to be honest with you. That's the biggest thing.
You said earlier as well that you haven't built your legacy yet. What do you think needs to happen for you to turn around and be like, legacy, create it?
Yeah. I mean, so there's a period, and we won't go too deep into it because we've already talked about all these other things, but I had a period where I was helping a lot of freelancers too, because I started off as like a freelancer before I came into the D2C space. So I've helped like thousands of freelancers, especially copywriters, which was my first sort of vocation once I went out on my own. And I know a lot of them would say I've helped them with, you know, getting like making more money or going independent, becoming a freelancer, quitting their job, freedom. And I think that's awesome. Um on the business side, I like you hear, when we have this talk, like this podcast interview, like you can hear I've done a lot of things. And I think that's good and bad, right? It's good because like cool, I've got a lot of experiences, I've made lots of money, I've also lost money, I've walked away from money, but I haven't built like that really like legacy level company that could survive without me, that has like touches the lives of tens of millions of people, like millions of people, sure, like a supplement company. The supplements were good. I never sold a supplement I didn't believe in, but like at the same time, it wasn't like, it's like another supplement company, you know? Whereas there's something that really has that level of impact. And then later on in life, it'll be philanthropy and things like that too. And I've got some ideas for that. But I think it's building something sustainable, not like we started this brand, it scaled, I sold it pretty early on, or I cashed out early on, or it got shut down early on. I walked away from it. Like I want, the thing that just has that staying power to me is really a big part of it, at least from a business side.
And every time we speak about your children, your eyes light up a little bit more than everything else. What, once they grow older, what do you want them to understand about what you built? Not the companies, right? But the choices that you made along the way.
I think it really comes down to the intentional balance. I just want them to understand that I made the time to be there and be present with them. Uh, our 8-year-old, for example, my wife and I have both put her to bed pretty much every night. We both done bedtime, like, since she was born. I mean, there's, like, uh, the occasional exception, like, her and I are going to Arizona at the end of this month for a dad-daughter trip and seeing my sister and one of my nephews, so, we won't both put her to bed then. But like basically, 95% of nights we both do bedtime. And we joke that she'll be talking to a therapist, in 20 years from now and going, my parents were so overbearing. They both did bedtime. And like, so probably true. But I hope they understand the intentionality of it. Like my dad, I loved him, loved him. He passed away like right when I went into the world of freelancing. And I always have great memories of him as a great dad, but he traveled a lot for work. He long commutes, all these sorts of things. And so, he wasn't there for a lot of stuff. And so I really was intentional about wanting to be present and be there. And I did just hope they, appreciate that and then model off of it with their own children. I mean, they're both women. They'll be moms. Maybe it's more likely that they will just like because of biology, we can dispute that if you want, but it probably would be true. But if I had a son, it would be the same thing, And so that's really what I hope.
Incredible. Stefan, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you opening up, really appreciate you sharing. And particularly just highlighting that winning isn't just what you make, it's also what you didn't have to lose to get there. And I think that's where a lot of people get it wrong. They think the goal is more revenue, more growth, more scale, more profit. But at a certain point, I think it's not just about how much you can build. I think it's about what you're able to keep intact while you build it. And so I'm really appreciative of you sharing that. This has been the fifth quarter. Until next week, quiet moves, deep minds, and game changing conversations. Thank you for listening in.